Jessica and Michael were an ordinary married couple living in a suburb of Denver, Colorado. They had been married for 12 years and had two children, 9-year-old Brian and 6-year-old Sophie. Jessica's life revolved around her family. She took the children to school, cooked dinners, and took care of the house. Michael worked construction, often 60 hours a week, to pay the mortgage and provide for the family's basic needs. Recently, however, it has become particularly difficult for them. Inflation was rising, prices for everything were going up, and Michael's salary was staying almost the same. The family could barely make ends meet. Brian dreamed of new sports equipment for baseball, but he had to be convinced to make do with the old one. Sophie wanted to join a dance class like her friend, but Jessica said no because it was too expensive. Jessica began to feel guilty that she couldn't help Michael and the children. She looked for a job, but after years of career breaks, no one wanted to hire her for a good position. Part-time jobs at the cash register or in a cafe would only bring in a pittance, which would not solve their problems. It seemed to her that the situation was hopeless, and this thought haunted her. One day, Jessica was sitting in a small cafe near Sophie's school when an old friend, James, approached her. He was her classmate and now ran a successful business. After a brief greeting, they sat down at a table and started talking about life. James said that he was lucky to be successful and asked how Jessica was doing. She shared her problems without hiding them. James listened carefully and then offered to help her. He said he could solve her financial difficulties, but hinted that he wanted something in return. At first, Jessica didn't understand what he was talking about, but his eyes and the way he spoke made her realize what he meant. Jessica was shocked. She refused and quickly ended the conversation. But James's words never left her mind. He talked about an amount that could cover all their expenses for several months, buy the children something they had long dreamed of, and even allow Michael to reduce his workload a little. Over the next few days, she thought about the offer constantly. She was tormented by doubts, shame, and despair. Jessica began to justify herself by saying that it was a one-time thing and that she was doing it for the sake of her children. She convinced herself that Michael would never find out and everything would be in the past. This decision changed her life forever. Jessica hesitated for a long time before making her choice. She couldn't sleep at night, thinking about her children, about Michael, and what would happen if he found out. Despair and guilt were intertwined, forming a tangle of emotions that she could not cope with. She had no one to talk to, because even her closest friends would not have understood this decision. It was something she had to decide for herself. James, meanwhile, took his time. He texted her a few times, asking if she had changed her mind, but he didn't push. His tone in his messages was calm and even friendly, which confused Jessica even more. She felt like he really wanted to help her, even though she realized that he had his own self-interest in it. A week after their conversation, Jessica made up her mind. She made an appointment to meet with James. She told herself that it would be a one-time thing, that she would do it and never go back on that decision. But that evening was the beginning of a series of events that turned her life upside down. The meeting took place at the hotel where James had rented a room. Jessica was nervous. Her hands were shaking, and her heart was pounding like never before. She tried not to think about what was happening and imagined how this money would change her family's lives. She imagined the smiles on Brian and Sophie's faces when they got what they had wanted for a long time. But these thoughts could not completely drown out the shame she was feeling. James, as always, behaved confidently and calmly. He didn't put pressure on her or make her feel obligated. This was his specialty. He gave Jessica a sense of control over the situation, although she realized that control was only an illusion. Everything happened quickly, and in a few hours she was returning home clutching an envelope with money. This money really solved a lot of problems. Jessica was able to pay for Sophie's dance class, buy a new sports uniform for Brian, and even save a little for the future. Michael noticed that there was extra money in the house, but Jessica explained that she was able to find a temporary job. He seemed satisfied and did not ask any further questions. But that was not the end of the story. James contacted her again a few weeks later. He said he wanted to meet again and offered an even larger sum. Jessica, again, felt excited and anxious, but this time it was harder to refuse. She could already see how the money was making her family's life easier, and despite her shame, she agreed. Several of these meetings became a regular occurrence. Jessica convinced herself that she was doing it for the sake of her children, but each time it became more and more difficult for her to separate her emotions. James was attentive to her. He listened to her problems, took an interest in her life, and Jessica began to feel more than just gratitude for him. Over time, she realized that this relationship had developed into something she hadn't expected. She began to compare James to Michael, and the comparison was not in her husband's favor. Michael was tired, constantly busy with work, and often didn't pay attention to her. James, on the other hand, seemed strong, confident, and most importantly, he saw her as a woman, not just a mother and a housewife. However, these emotions made Jessica feel even more guilty. She realized that she was cheating not only physically, but also emotionally. She was afraid that Michael would find out, and it would destroy everything they had built together. But at the same time, she couldn't stop. These meetings were the only way out of her world of routine and constant worries. Michael, meanwhile, began to notice changes in Jessica's behavior. She became more distant, often looking thoughtful and nervous. He tried to talk to her, but she always made excuses, saying it was just the stress of finding a job and taking care of the kids. One night, when Jessica was out later than usual, Michael decided to check her phone. He found messages from James that left no room for doubt. Michael felt his world crumble. He couldn't believe that the woman he loved and was building a family with could do such a thing. At that moment, their lives changed forever. Michael decided to confront Jessica, and that conversation was the beginning of the biggest test of their marriage. Michael sat in his empty house, trying to understand how this could have happened. What he found out turned his life upside down. He had found a message from James, proof that Jessica had been cheating on him. Until recently, he had been sure that their marriage was strong, but now that foundation was shaking. When Jessica returned home, Michael met her with a cold and serious look. He showed her his phone with open messages. Her face changed, and the tension became visible. She realized that there was no point in hiding anything anymore. Jessica began to explain. She admitted that it all started because of financial difficulties. She thought she was doing it for the sake of the children, but the situation got out of hand. She talked about James, their meetings, and how it all became more than she expected. Her voice trembled as she tried to justify her actions, but every word hurt Michael even more. He listened in silence, trying to keep his emotions in check. Inside, he was filled with anger, but at the same time, he couldn't help but notice Jessica's remorse. She told him that she had cut off all ties with James, but that didn't lessen the weight of what had happened. Michael understood that her betrayal was not only a physical act, but also an emotional rift that would be difficult to overcome. The following days were difficult for both of them. Michael decided he needed time to think things through. He went into seclusion, trying to sort out his feelings and see if he could forgive Jessica. She, on the other hand, did everything she could to show that she wanted to make things right. She deleted James's contacts, avoided any communication, and suggested that he see a family therapist. Therapy was the first step on the road to understanding. Though they began to talk about what had brought them to this point, Jessica talked about her fears and despair that made her agree to James' proposal. Michael, in turn, admitted that he too had been feeling exhausted and felt that he was not paying enough attention to his family. Nevertheless, Rebuilding trust proved to be a difficult process. Michael often found himself thinking about what had happened, and these memories haunted him. Jessica, on the other hand, was ready to work on their relationship, realizing that her every move was now under scrutiny. She focused on showing Michael that he and the children were her top priority. This crisis was a big lesson for both of them. They realized how important communication is in a marriage and how easy it is to lose trust if you don't share your feelings. Although the road to recovery was long and difficult, they decided to go through it together for the sake of themselves and their children. The following weeks were a test for Michael and Jessica. Although they decided not to divorce immediately, the atmosphere in the house was tense. Michael kept his distance, was often silent, and avoided unnecessary conversations. Jessica did her best to show that she was sorry and willing to work on their relationship, but she felt that her every move was being scrutinized. Michael spent a lot of time thinking. He went back to the moments when their relationship had just begun. They were young, in love, and dreaming of a future together. Jessica had always been a source of inspiration and support for him. Her betrayal was not only a breach of trust, but also a blow to his own self-esteem. He wondered if he could have done something to avoid it, or if he was really so distant that she found support in another man. Jessica, for her part, tried to find ways to make amends. She became more attentive to Michael, trying to talk to him more often, even if he remained cold. She also started working more and found a part-time job at a local coffee shop to show that she could contribute to the family budget without compromising her moral principles. Another important step was their decision to visit a family psychologist. At the first session, the atmosphere was tense. Michael sat with his face closed, looking away, and Jessica was nervous, clenching her hands in her lap. The psychologist, Dr. Brenner, calmly explained that their task was to figure out how to regain trust and rebuild the relationship if they both wanted to. During these sessions, Jessica was able to talk openly about her feelings and motives for the first time. She talked about her fear of poverty and the desperation that made her accept James' proposal. She also acknowledged that Michael's emotional distance played a role in how far the situation had gone. But the hardest thing for her to talk about was how this relationship began to bring her not only financial help, but also a certain emotional comfort that she lacked at home. Michael listened to her, even though every word she said caused him inner pain. He also began to talk about his feelings, how he had always tried to be a good husband and father, but often felt that his efforts went unnoticed. He admitted that he didn't notice how unhappy Jessica was because he was too focused on work and financial problems. Therapy sessions were an important step for them. They started talking more at home, discussing not only the affair, but also what had led them to this crisis. Michael began to see that Jessica was sincerely trying to make things right. She was willing to make any changes to show that their family was her top priority. However, rebuilding trust was a long and painful process. Michael often found himself imagining Jessica with James. These thoughts haunted him, and he couldn't just forget what had happened. But he also began to realize that holding on to his anger and resentment would not help. If he wanted to keep his family together, he would have to learn to forgive. Jessica, for her part, did not give up trying to prove her commitment. She began to organize more family time, dinners together, walks, even small trips out of town on weekends. She also resumed old hobbies that had once brought her and Michael together, such as hiking or cooking their favorite meals together. She wanted to recapture the closeness they had in the beginning. The children noticed the changes too. Brian and Sophie were too young to understand what was happening, but they could see that their parents were spending more time together and smiling more often. For them, it was a sign that things were getting better in the family. One evening, after another session with Dr. Brenner, Michael and Jessica were sitting in the kitchen with cups of tea. For the first time in a long time, they were talking calmly, without tension. Michael said that he was starting to see changes and feel that their family could overcome this crisis. But he also warned that he still needed more time. Jessica accepted that. She realized that things would not be fixed so quickly, and she was willing to wait. She felt that their efforts were paying off and believed that they could rebuild their love and trust. Months passed, and their relationship gradually changed. Michael learned to talk about his feelings, and Jessica no longer hid her fears and worries. They became a team that overcomes difficulties together. Although the scars of the past remained, they no longer determined their future. This crisis taught them an important lesson. They realized how important constant communication and support is in a marriage. Although their journey was difficult, they felt that they had become closer to each other than ever before. It's been over a year since Michael found out about Jessica's infidelity. During this time, their lives have gradually changed, and although the scars have not been completely healed, they have found a way to become a real family again. After completing their sessions with Dr. Brenner, Michael and Jessica began to work on their relationship without outside help. Therapy gave them important tools that they used to resolve conflicts and avoid past mistakes. The main rule was to always tell each other the truth, even if it hurts, and to find time to discuss their feelings. Michael, though not immediately, began to feel that he could trust Jessica again. She was doing everything she could to show her commitment. She no longer hid anything from him, not even the smallest things. She became open about her thoughts, feelings, and even finances so that Michael could feel that they were acting as a team. Jessica, for her part, also saw a change in Michael. He began to spend more time with his family. They went on picnics together, attended their children's school events, and even started planning trips they had long dreamed of. The children were happy that their parents were spending a lot of time together again, and the atmosphere in the house became warmer and more cozy. However, the real test for them was the decision to tell the children what had happened. Michael and Jessica realized that they wanted to be honest when the children were older, but for now they decided not to traumatize them with unnecessary details. They explained that parents sometimes face difficulties, but it's important to work together to make things right. In the end, Michael and Jessica felt that their efforts were not in vain. One evening, sitting on the terrace of their home after another family weekend, they discussed their dreams. Jessica shared that she wanted to start her own business, and Michael supported her. He said that he was ready to help her with everything to make her feel independent and fulfilled. This conversation became a symbol of a new stage in their lives. They decided to leave the past behind and focus on the future. They knew that they could not forget what had happened, but they also realized that their life together was much more valuable than the mistakes of the past. The final step in their recovery was their wedding anniversary. Michael decided to surprise Jessica and organized a celebration for just the two of them. They traveled to the place where they had once spent their honeymoon and recalled the moments when their love had just begun. That night, under the starry sky, Michael told Jessica, "I never thought we could get through this, but now I realize that our strength lies in our ability to forgive and work on ourselves. You're not perfect, I'm not perfect, but together we can create something truly beautiful." Jessica smiled and took his hand. "I'm grateful to you for giving us a chance, and I promise I will never let you down again." This story ended with them finding new meaning in their marriage. Their relationship became deeper and more mature, and their family became stronger. They realized that love is not only a feeling, but also a constant work that makes them stronger together.